Thanks, Julia. I was torn listening to Jamie because I'm a couple chapters behind what she just read, and I'm having a hard time putting the book down. So now I know she goes to Malaysia. I mean, I could see that happening, but you had to blow it for me, eh? Yeah. So, I was checking the baseball scores and doing all that. Anyways, I'm enormously happy to be here. Trish and we haven't been in Vancouver in 18 years. I know that's shameful. But we popped into this garden on our way to get married in Euclid, just outside of Tofino. So this place has a very special meaning to us. And to be invited to be part of this, I can't tell you how thrilled we are. And to be honest, I've been very jealous about the community here. If you come from Ottawa, you'll understand that. And it's not just because of geography and climate and food. It's all that too, but the epicenter of Asian literature is here. It's not in Toronto. It's nowhere else. We all know roads lead to Vancouver if you want to earn your keep in writing. So to be part of that is amazing. I know I'm supposed to read, but I hate reading, so I'm going to use up my 5 minutes. No, I will read. I do want to say you do things differently in Ottawa. My niece just moved here a few months ago, and her observations sort of reinforce what I've always thought. You do things differently here. The Asian vibe is very different. The counting game is very different. For those of you who know what I'm talking about, if you're racialized, you'll walk into a room and you start counting the number of people who look like you, right? And then you'll work your way to other groups, right? You don't have to play that here. Yeah, because you just don't have enough hands. In Ottawa, you only need a couple fingers, and that's if you don't count staff. So it's enormously affirming to be here, and I can only imagine what it's like to write in a community like that. The other vibe that's different here is what my niece called, you have Asian hipsters here. Yeah. So, and that to me says there's maturity, there's confidence, and there's history in this community, which, there's critical mass in Toronto, but there's also a mass of other voices, a cacophony of sounds and competing attentions. And you guys have a lock on it here, and it's wonderful. And you can when you meet an Asian from Vancouver, they have that confidence. They just have a breeding that's different than I think some of the insecurities that somebody like me from Toronto might have. So, have I used up my 5 minutes? No? Okay. I tried to get away with that. So Jamie and I aren't big fans of reading, but she does it so well, especially if you're reading her book. And one of the reasons why I've been hesitant to read is because my novel actually doesn't lend itself very well to oral reading because it's epistolary form, it's letters, and it's from the perspective of an 11-year-old boy in 1970. If you've ever read the writings of an 11-year-old, it's not really readable, right? So part of my research was to read the writings of immigrant boys, second generation in immigrant schools. So the grammatic errors, the syntax, the sentence structure, it's really not readable. So I tried to replicate some of that early on in the book. So in the first 2 letters or entries, there are about 30 some odd errors, which you wouldn't hear because it's a visual experience. He crosses out how to spell Quebec 3 times before he still gets it wrong, things like that. It's because I wanted to convey the challenge and the emotion and the struggle of writing. And I thought one of the ways to do that was to actually write like an 11-year-old. Now, the entire book isn't like that because you would get frustrated after a while because you do have to move on with plot and character, right? So Johnny's writing does improve dramatically once it becomes monetized by his best friend. So I will give you a quick read, and I thought there's no better place to start than the beginning. Sorry, I should have had that all prepared. Okay, September 21, 1970. Dear Pen Pal, my name is Johnny Wong. I am in grade 5 and go to Ord Street Public School, and I live in Toronto. Mrs. Clover is my teacher. She said I have to do a writing project, like write to a pen pal. She said a pen pal is like a best friend in a faraway place. She said she will exchange these letters with a grade 5 class in Idaho every month. I'm sorry, but I have a for real friend now. His name is Raleigh. He rents a room beside us, except we have the biggest room in the house, and we share the washroom and the kitchen with him and 2 university students in the room downstairs. Raleigh's rich. He says he's in the acquisition of fine things and buying and selling business, and he trades shiny things like forks and jewels and really old money. My mother likes that I have a friend who does not tease me. Raleigh is very kind. Sometimes I want to call him Dad, but my for real father is in Vancouver. It was Raleigh who gave me my first pack of hockey cards. Now I have 90 cards. Someday, I hope to get a Dave Keon rookie card. So, I do not need another friend unless you can make the new student Barry Arbo stop calling me names and getting me into trouble. So, if I could just, do I have time to deconstruct that? 30 seconds? So, one of the things I tried to do in this very short first entry is establish characters. So I've mentioned half of the characters in the book, even though they didn't have speaking lines. I've established setting and time, right at the top, September 21st, 1970, a month before something big happens in Canada. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, don't Google it, buy my book. I've tried to establish an emotional hook by showing him longing for his absent father, hungering for a friend and for his mother's approval, annoyance at another friend, and reinforcing a hockey backdrop, which is a big part of the book. And if you really want to read the next entry, then I've probably established what was the most important thing in the novel, and that's voice. Because capturing the voice of an 11-year-old and staying with an 11-year-old for 120 some odd pages, short read, is a very, it sounds difficult, it sounds easy because it's just a boy, writing letters. But every word, every nuance is there for a reason. So I hope you like it. Well, let's say hypothetically I was live then and I knew that era. We'll start with that. All three of our stories are identity stories, right? It's about who we are, where we belong, and where we're going. I mean, Chuck's traveling around the world. He thinks he's, doing stories about food. It's a wanderlust. He's looking for himself, and Lily, the character there, is trying to figure out who she is and where she's going. In the same way, 11-year-old Johnny is trying to figure out who he is. But in my story, identity doesn't have to be just about an individual. It could be about a community, it could be a city, it could be a nation. So I try and do all four in this short, thin little book. But in 1970, Toronto was wrapped around this Protestant ethos. Called itself Toronto the Good. It was so bland. It should have called itself Toronto the Bland. But there was a lot happening beneath that veneer. I mean, there were the American draft dodgers, Chinese immigration had just exploded, and the community was evolving and changing. And I lived on Henry Street. Julia was my neighbor, unbeknownst to me. I was number 60 or 20.
Really?
I know 22.
You do?
22. Yeah, I don't remember.
I don't remember it.
Yeah. So, Julia might remember, you knew where all the Chinese lived because they had carefully tended, neat little gardens, right, of vegetables. It was a student ghetto. American draft dodgers partied well into the night. And in the eyes of a child, everything is larger than life. I mean, Bazooka Joes, Mannix, Adam 12, Partridge Family, and hockey. I remember all that stuff really well. And I remember, I think, one of Canada's first 9/11 moments, and that was the FLQ crisis, which shocked and gripped the nation. My parents didn't speak English, but they read the Chinese dailies. And there were 3 Toronto English language newspapers as well, and every day it was a different headline. Teachers talked about it, my parents talked about it. You couldn't escape it. This was something that was in your face, and even as I was a little younger than the actual character in the book, I remember it really well. So it was a period of change for a boy on the cusp of adolescence. It was a period of change for the growing Chinese community, and it was a period of change for Toronto, which you'll find this hard to believe, but it was becoming quite self-absorbed. This is a work of fiction, right? And it was a period of change for Canada, which would be just swallowed in Quebec separatism for the next 2 generations. It still defines our politics, right? So I had 4 parallel but intersecting coming-of-age stories captured during the FLQ crisis. So I really honored the history behind it, so the dates and the actual events were as accurate as I could make it. And even the hockey scores were as true. I had a friend fact check the Leaf Vancouver Canuck game, and yes, I had that right, but it doesn't look like much of a story, but there's a lot of tension beneath the humor, and a lot of people have read it. This was hilarious, Wayne, but there's a lot of tension, and maybe I'll try and weave that in at another point, but whether it was about race, I mean, there's a murder here, there's terrorism, there's Pierre Laporte's body found in the back of a car, there's all sorts of things that just sort of stop you, but parallel with the humor. So 1970 really stood out, assuming I was alive. There's no balance. Yeah. I think the pathway to publication can be fierce. It's the journey through a valley of rejection, but also a journey of self-discovery. And if we've talked about this, Jamie, you don't want to be one and done. Yeah. Because I mean, if you read her stuff, there's potential, and if you want a pathway, not just the publication, but to improve your craft, to be serious as a writer, you need to be committed. You need to be disciplined. You need to be focused. I started writing in the late 90s. I was single at the time. I was probably trying to meet people. I'm sure I was. I'm married now, so it worked. But I didn't take it all that seriously. I joined a group of other writers who were far more committed to it. They were writing novels when I was still doing short stories. I mean, I got the odd short story published, won a few contests, but I didn't have that commitment. I didn't have that focus. One of my colleagues, Amy, you did a launch, or you did a reading with her. She just signed a 4-book deal with an American publisher, and she's so committed, and she's focused, and she's a mother, but her writing schedule is fierce. She starts early in the day. She takes time off work. She has a level of commitment that I never dreamed of until fairly recently. And then I tasted success. You're tasting success. Chuck, I can't believe that's your first book. Like, yeah, I read Condé Nast Traveler all the time, and your stories belong in a magazine like that. Like, you all have the ability to write, but it's what's the next book going to look like, right? So, but now I've also tasted success, and it's wonderful. I love it. But my wife will tell you that's all I do. Okay, I mean, I have a full-time day job, but I don't have a lot of balance. There's not an easy answer. Do you want to be published now, or do you want to be published later? How hard do you want to work at this? I have a friend who self-publishes, and for him, that's fine. He writes Victorian romances. He's this European immigrant, and like, really? You write Victorian romances? He's making hand over fist money, and to him, that's important. He's not concerned about craft. He's getting published. So, I don't know. Did I answer your question? Yeah.
That's a hard question.
So it's a creative. If you write to meet somebody or to be published, your motivation is very differently. If you write because you're committed to craft, you have a creative itch, and it makes you feel whole. Don't worry about publication. Just write for the joy of it. Yeah, and that's anything that I've enjoyed writing. It's because I felt I had something to say, something I wanted to do, and I've got all these projects lined up because I really believe in them. And whether they get published or not, it's incidental. Sure, we all want commercial success, but like, I don't feel right if I'm not writing, or if I'm not thinking about writing, or if I'm not listening or talking to other writers or consuming podcasts, because it becomes a way of life. It's great.
Is he still alive?
He is. I shouldn't assume that people know who Dave Keon is, because this is not the center of the universe. That would be Toronto, right? Or everybody knows who Dave Keon is. He was voted the greatest Toronto Maple Leaf of all time.
Wow.
So every boy needs somebody to look up to, but I think a male role model is really important to a boy. And in the novel, Johnny doesn't have that because his dad's absent, and I think I established that pretty quickly in the first letter. So, you know, he watches TV. You know, he's obsessed with Mannix and all these cop shows and superheroes, but none of them are tangible, of course. And not that Dave Keon is either, but he's flesh and blood. He is somebody who represents really healthy male paternal values. You know, he's fair, sportsmanlike. He's decent. He's a pacifist. He's humble. So he's all the things that Johnny wishes that he had with a male role model. And so he writes to Dave Keon like I did as a child too. I did have a father, but I was pretty hockey mad as well. So I used Dave Keon because he represented all those things, all the things that were lacking, and all the things that we love about, many of us value about what a man should be. So, I wrote to Dave Keon. He didn't write back, but I didn't have a stamp on my letter, so I didn't write back as I was hurt, not realizing that you needed a stamp. But I started to write to him again last year. Okay, and the internet is great for tracking people down unless you're the one being tracked down. Yeah, so I tracked him down and I wrote him a letter and I said, oh, you know what, I don't know if I should share this. Yeah. Yes, please. No, you know what? There's the perception of Dave Keon, everything that I've described you is true. That's all I'm going to say. And if I say anything beyond that, it would be like kissing and telling. I would be compromising a relationship that I have with him. He's too decent a guy. This is my thing with him. But there's reasons he's the greatest Leaf of all time, not just because he was a fantastic hockey player. He still is a wonderful human being. Speaking of a generational change, I think I'm going to go backwards a little bit and just mention somebody that everybody knows and is familiar with, and that would, of course, be Waste and Joy. I could mention Jay Peeney, but I'm going to reference All That Matters. And I know many of you have read him and read that quiet, gentle story that pays homage to the struggles of early immigrants who stood together, persevered, adapted, illustrating the strength of family bonds. The whole book is humble, as is everybody in there. It resonates for me because for those who've been here for at least a couple of generations, I mean, he's talking about, many of our family stories, right? Fiona mentioned the Head Tax Exclusion Act, and many of our families went through that. And he chronicles that. So from a sociological, cultural, and historical perspective, as well as being just a great story, it's a must-read to understand the Chinese diaspora. I hope all my nephews and nieces someday pick it up. Nowadays, I think they're more interested in other things. They're actually more likely to read yours, Jamie, and some of the authors that you've listed, because some of the old stuff is just it's a footnote in history to them, and they don't quite get it. But for me, I love history, and it's meaningful for me. Number two, I'm going to second Lindsay Wang, the Woo Woo. Her story is everything that Wayson's isn't, but is just as captivating because there's nobody heroic in it, all right? The family is completely messed up, dysfunctional, it's dark, it's funny, it's honest, it's not quiet, all right? It's in your face. These are not role model, daughters and parents. They're heroes because they eventually persevere and survive, but it's not the classic Chinese trope of what families are, and I don't use trope in a pejorative sense. I just mean it's a different portrayal of Chinese families, because not all of our families, came up like Wayson's and families holding together, Lindsay Wong's was a real challenge, and I have so much respect for somebody who can air her family laundry like that and just sort of like complete vulnerability. And that's what a lot of current readers like, that sort of intimate sort of voice, and Lindsay captures that really, really well. The last writer that I want to speak to isn't Canadian, but for me it's must read, Charles Yu, Interior Chinatown. It's an important read because it speaks to escaping the invisibility, the facelessness that's pre-assigned to many Asians, and the genericness which Hollywood and popular culture have always portrayed us. And he writes it in a bold, daring, satirical way that I've never read. It's completely meta. It transcends novels in that it's two fictional worlds going on at the same time. He's a screenwriter. He worked on Westworld and a number of other things, but a brilliant read, and relates to the Chinese diaspora in that, I mean, there's a lot of history in it, but there's so much of our history is about being invisible. And he puts it out there on the table, and he challenges that notion, and he forces us to think and laugh and cringe at the same time, and I love that.
I want to follow up on that, especially your point about being brave and speaking out. When I moved to Ottawa from Toronto in the early 90s, the loudest, the most vocal and assertive racialized group were East Africans, right? From Eritrea, Ethiopia, Djibouti. They were louder than I'd heard any newcomer or established racial group speak, and they got things done. People listened, and I thought that was fantastic, and I still use that as an example today. But it makes me, it also makes me a bit sad because, you know, my roots go back 110 years, and we would never have said things like that, you know, the way these East Africans did. We just would not have asserted ourselves. And I thought long and hard about why do we, in comparison to other groups, appear quiet, right? And when I was researching my first novel, because it's set in ancient China, Finding the Way, I wonder it's because, you know, Chinese history is based on authoritarian rule. There's just not a lot of room for free will, right? Except there have been at least 20 historical uprisings and rebellions in Chinese history, and in Japanese history even more. So it's not baked into our DNA, okay? Maybe it's baked into the immigration experience though, because that's completely different. I'd love to be able to hear other people's views on that another time, I understand. But there's a silence to us sometimes, and I may not make a lot of friends by saying this, but it magnifies the bullseye on our back. It implies acquiescence, and it implies that we're collaborating with the system sometimes, which is why I think, like Jamie says, sometimes we need to be brave, and we need to speak out. And then there's some people who think, well, what's wrong with collaborating with the system? I mean, like, you know, Asian representation in popular culture is fantastic nowadays, right? You turn on Netflix, any streaming, movies, and like, we've never seen so much Asian content before, you know, and that's wonderful. It is so encouraging. But at the same time, you know, the amount of anti-Asian hatred that's happened, it barely merits a ripple where I'm from, and that bothers me as much as the actual violence. The fact that I thought people would have our back, who would speak out. So to me, the message is, let's celebrate our achievements, but let's not take anything for granted. And it hurts sometimes to speak out, and I know there are people in here who already do that. And, you know, you'll always have room at my dinner table for doing that, because I know how hard it is. I've done it in Ottawa where you play that counting game and I stop at 1 because that's me, all right? And it's very lonely. But you have strength in numbers here, and you have critical mass, and that's why I like, you know, I'm envious and I'm jealous of the strength and the solidarity that Jimmy's talking about, just being here. I couldn't say this in Ottawa because I'd be squirming and I'd know people would be rolling their eyes. There goes Wayne again. But we need to speak out, even when it hurts, even if it appears to go against what we were taught. And because not everybody's going to do that for us.